Welcome. This is the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, Forbes contributor, and general explorer of the service and experience space. The thing I'm really interested in is how do we create organizations that produce better outcomes for both their customers and their people. This podcast has been running since January 2011, and so we have a big archive to explore. Check out the archive at adrianswinscoe.com. That's enough from me. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Edwin Mar, who is the Chief Evangelist at Nextiva and also a kind of newly minted, actually an author of a number of different sort of things. And so I'm really interested in, really looking forward to speaking to Edwin about his new book that we'll talk about a little bit later. But first of all, Edwin, welcome to the podcast. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. Nice to have you, on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Adrian. It's going to be fun. And I really appreciate the ability to be here with you. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Now, Edwin, for those that don't know you, aren't familiar with your work, maybe not even familiar with Nextiva, can you tell me a little bit about you and a bit about the work that you do? So just for our audience.
Sure. Well, first, I have the honor of being a big promoter of Nextiva as their so-called chief evangelist, which is a title that I've actually had before. Back in the 80s, I was the chief evangelist at a company called Dialogic.
Okay.
So it's a title that I've grown used to. And it kind of makes me an industry cheerleader.
Mm-hmm.
I love my customers and I do my best to promote their businesses by collaborating with them and kind of putting them on a pedestal and talking about their use cases and their success stories. And I've been doing this for about 45 years now, since 1980, when I was selling, telephone systems to mom and pop grocery stores and pizza shops and the like. So it's been a long journey. And I can tell you, though, Adrian, it's more fun now than it's ever been. There's so many cool things you can do in the area of customer experience, especially with the advent of generative AI and automation tools, process automation. I'm having more fun now than ever.
Yeah, well, I must say, I mean, I know this podcast is audio only, but Edwin and I are speaking to each other over a video call because we can see each other. And I say to people, I keep the video on just for visual cues and things. But when Edwin says that he's been in and around this space for over 40 years, I'm going to say, sir, you don't look like you've been at it for like over 40 years. You look like but yet a young youth.
No. I'm actually a senior citizen. I'm 66.
Wow. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Edwin looks great for it. Oh, that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Well, you just made my day. The rest of this should be easy.
There you go. We'll just call it quits there. We'll go, by the way, Edwin's got a new book out. You should check it out. But no, actually, let's dive into that because I know that you've recently published a book and it's called Mastering the Customer Experience. I mean, I wanted to say, first of all, congratulations on that. I had a look at it. I know how much work goes into books. And so it's sometimes, it can feel like a heavy load until you get it out into the world. But I wanted to say, first of all, congrats on that. But I wanted to ask you, can you tell me a little bit about the book and what is its main sort of thesis and who's it for?
Yeah. Well, I call it, and this is kind of in the subject under the title, I call it a guide for those who have this unwavering dedication to understanding customers better and who want to do something about it.
Right.
So that's who it's for. And that manifests itself in many different ways from a persona standpoint. For example, consultants, systems integrators, project leaders, change agents, new managers to an enterprise, anyone who's exploring, who has a thirst for understanding and wants to go deep on understanding organizational maturity, transaction taxonomies, which we'll probably talk about later.
Yeah.
So it's really for those people, anyone who wants to make a difference
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think this, when I read it, I was a bit like, oh, so it's not just about, it's not a book about almost like trying to sell the case to deliver a great experience. I think that case has been kind of like, it felt to me, it's like that case has been made, but it's more of a case of this is a, as you say, a guide, as in all these different sort of things that you can go and do. And what I wanted to, and how you should go about it. And what I wanted to do to try and give people a bit of a flavor of the book, I wanted to just like, well, we don't want to tell people about it soup to nuts, obviously, because you want people to go and buy the book. That's part of the object of pushing out a book. But I want to dig into a few things from the book that stood out for me. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about was, so Thomas Gorney, who is the CEO of Nextiva, and I mean, I'm familiar with Nextiva because I've written about some of the stuff that they've done in the past, and it's an impressive platform, but and ahead of the game, and I think in many ways, from my perspective. But Thomas writes in the foreword, this book has been over 25 years in the making, and so I wanted you to sort of, I was like going, explain that to me. Because I'm like, that's like a big homework assignment. It's like 25 years of like, blimey. So tell me a bit about, can you tell me a bit about the backstory of the book?
Sure. Well, it all started with me helping clients to improve customer experiences. And in the beginning, it was more about tuning up their interactive voice response systems, the menuing, the structure of them, helping them to tune up their websites. And, you know, I had a consultancy called Sterling Audits, which we did video-based usability testing, where we would actually put people on camera who were, you know, navigating websites and having problems, or navigating through interactive voice response systems. And we would map their eye movement, their gestures, the look of their face, and we would map all of the breakpoints or the friction points in those applications as they navigated through, and then use that as a means to find out where the problems were. So it had a lot to do with not only best practices in automation, but heuristics.
Right.
And we did that a lot. And I held these workshops, these 2-3 day workshops, literally around the world. And many companies came to these things, and we started developing a methodology for discovery in order to identify the low-hanging fruit for automation targets or for advanced workflows. And, you know, over the years, I mean, I consulted with, you know, everything from, you know, Manitoba Telecom to, you know, On Track Health, Ford, the Post Office, Verizon,
Right.
Blue Cross of Idaho, you know, people all over the world. And over the years, we've began tweaking it and cultivating it and making this discovery process better and better. And when I joined Nextiva as a result of a merger of my company Threo with Nextiva back in January, I said, you know what? We have such a great professional services department here at Nextiva that has its own center of excellence in terms of discovery. Why don't we put all these thoughts into a book,
Right.
and publish it, and you know, get all these thoughts down. So it literally has been 25 years.
I mean, I think that it's fascinating how kind of like, because, you know, here's the thing, it sort of mirrors my own sort of experience. So I have this thing where, and maybe I should do something more substantial with it, but it's just like I have this observational thing that I do. It's like an ongoing piece of research where I try and observe some of the behaviors and characteristics that companies that lead their field in experience terms. And I've sort of been building out this list, as it were, like over the last 15 or 16 years. And it's just based on, you know, constant research, updating things, thinking about things, how things fit together. And it's like, it's funny how some of these things, they're not flashes in the pan. Sometimes they take it's like slow cooking, right? It's like emergent stuff.
Yeah.
You're like, we start here, going, oh, that works. Oh, we iterate on that. Oh, and this was another thing that is really good. You keep building up. So I can understand how it takes that much time to actually get to a point where you're going, no, that's tried and tested. That works. So that, I mean, that's great. But as you said, the book centers on this 8-step discovery model, or a discovery process kind of like model. And I wanted to ask you about, I mean, could you give us a bit of a brief overview of what those different sort of steps are and kind of what they mean and why they're sort of important, just to give us, because the core, that's the heart of the book, just to give us a flavor of that.
Sure. And you know what's funny about it? Like when your listeners hear these 8 steps, they're going to go, "Oh, well, that's obvious. Oh, well, that's obvious."
Sure.
And it's funny because when you start engaging with an enterprise over an extended period to do the discovery and to start promoting candidates for automation or advanced workflows, everything that's obvious becomes less obvious as you get into the details.
Right.
It's interesting, but
easier to say, harder to do, right?
It really is. But in fact, one of the customers who went through this process about 7 years ago, gave us a quote for the book cover, about how they emerge from that process in a much better footing. And it's a bit tedious going through the process. It's a lot of work, but most folks who go through it are very happy they did. Now, the first thing that we do is establish these essential identification of goals or of targets.
Okay.
And it's a step that's very important for one really big reason. It has to do a little bit with the contention sometimes between the practitioner in a business unit versus the corporate directives.
Right. Okay.
For example, corporate directive might be, we're going to crush, expenses down by 20% this year, no matter what. But then, the president might have given the business unit that might include a CX function such as brand management or help desk or whatever. They might have said, I want your net promoter scores to improve by 20% this year.
Right.
And it's like, okay, let me get this straight. We're going to cut costs by 20%, but you want my customer satisfaction scores to go up by the same amount. Okay, let's see if we can rationalize this. So what we try to do in that first step is we try to bring the stakeholders into the room. We try to get a corporate sponsor, an executive, a C-level executive to sponsor the initiative. And we try to flesh out all of those possible points of contention right up front.
Yeah.
Right. And it's, it sounds like a no-brainer, but let me tell you, some of those discussions take hours and hours. And it's fun when you go in as an outsider and you don't have to deal with the day-to-day politics. You can say some things that maybe you wouldn't be able to say as an employee. So it helps to be able to facilitate that discussion as an outsider sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fascinating, man. And it speaks to a bunch of research that I've seen from different places, everywhere from, I think it's from Sugar CRM to LinkedIn to crumbs. I think it might have been McKinsey as well, who've all kind of like said that actually alignment between sales, marketing, and service is generally assumed, but largely non-existent. And so therefore that becomes the thing that can become causes a lot of issues. But those people that do the work and actually achieve that alignment tend to grow faster, are more profitable, more efficient, more effective, all these different sort of things. And sometimes, whilst it can, I think it's a human being sort of thing. Sometimes we don't like those difficult conversations and we don't want to wrestle with some of that sort of stuff because it's a negotiation. Yeah. I think, but it's super, super important and possibly a step that people don't spend enough time thinking about.
Yeah, in fact, I would say that this teaming and goal setting step, the step number 1, forces the issue of transparency.
Right.
And you're kind of getting it out on the table. So look, let's get all our cards on the table, everyone. What is your agenda? What is it that you think good looks like? How are you? And a lot of times the discussion gets into how people are incentivized financially.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like some supervisors or site managers in some contact centers are incentivized by hitting certain SLA targets or hitting, certain goals. And they're not going to let anything get in the way of them getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times the discussion, and I don't want to use the word devolves because it's just the truth, right? It's just sometimes it comes down to making sure that people are aligned from an incentive standpoint.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because if you're not, and you rationalize that at the executive level, right? So a lot of those, more sensitive issues kind of get fleshed out in this first step, but it forces transparency and collaboration. And anyone who really doesn't want to cooperate, their intention is made known very quickly, and then they might have to bring another team member on board if they find people that don't want to cooperate. The whole thing will fall apart.
Sure. At least you identify some of those challenges up front before you set off down the road, so you know what you need to kind of do before you can set off.
Yeah.
And so, second one.
Oh, the second one. Here's where it starts getting really interesting. I mean, beyond the blocking and tackling of the politics of the organization. Here's where we get down to work is step number 2. We build what we call a transaction taxonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just a fancy way of saying, okay, look, write down all of the touch points in terms of interactions with customers, right? For example, if you have a mobile app or smartphone app that people use to get account balances or deposit checks remotely or whatever, how many of those engagements happen each day in that modality of smartphone app? And how many, and how complex are they? And we t-shirt size it. Is it not complex at all? Simple? Is it medium complexity, or is it like really hard to accomplish? If task completion is difficult because it's a tedious process that you have to go through, like order entry or shopping carts and stuff like that. Okay, so what is it then? The transaction taxonomy basically is a snapshot of modalities, volume, and complexity.
Okay.
And what we urge people to kind of put it on a spreadsheet. I mean, in a conference room, if you're facilitating a session, you're scrawling all this stuff up on a whiteboard, or you have these 3M, easels around the room, and each one, can represent a different mode. And then you can do it that way, or you could use little sticky notes, that you can arrange like a mosaic, on the conference room table. I mean, whatever works. We're not highly prescriptive when it comes to the instrumentation for doing this. A lot of people just do it on a spreadsheet that they project, up onto a screen, right? But it's a very important step because it's kind of a gateway step. It sets the stage for doing a fairly deep analysis, which we'll get to in a few moments.
And that feels like it's important because, as you say, it establishes the landscape that you're dealing with. But then it's also going back to the first point, the point that you made in the first step, is it also doubles down on this whole transparency thing. So everybody's clear about what's going on, and you have a common view on what happens, when it happens, what sort of what's the quantity of volume that you're talking about, and also your view on the complexity of some of these kind of interactions as well.
Indeed. And the other thing it exposes, which is kind of anecdotal, which speaks to the third step. The other thing it exposes is just how mature the organization is.
Right.
Because if they can't lay their hands on this data, if the business unit managers, the practitioners, the contact center folks, the brand managers, if they cannot quote to you right off the top of their head, how many phone calls come in having to do with resetting a password or asking for a credit line increase. If they can't tell you within a minute or two what those numbers are and whether or not it's complex, you're in for a rough ride.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Because it speaks to the lack of organizational maturity. Because it's like, if you've ever seen this show Shark Tank,
yeah,
where budding entrepreneurs come in and they try to, give a pitch to a group of VCs. And, sometimes they get yelled at because it's like, you don't know your metrics. How do you expect us to lend you money if you don't know your own metrics? What is the cost of customer acquisition? What is the lifetime value of the customer? What is your monetization scheme? If you can't quote that, you get shamed.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, and I don't do any shaming.
No.
I'm not saying that. But once you get into this customer maturity model step, which is the third step, a lot comes spilling out.
Yeah.
And it gets very, very interesting, right? But the transaction taxonomy gives you kind of a peek into that. Once you have all the transaction taxonomy typed up, and it's, by the way, Adrian, it's a great homework assignment for listeners to go home and say, you know what? I listened to this podcast and they're talking about this discovery process. We've never really done a holistic transaction taxonomy. I'm going to go home and I'm going to bring my people together and we're going to do that over the next week. And we're going to maintain it. So every month we're going to update it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great takeaway homework assignment, by the way.
Yeah, and also if you're listening in and you take it to your next sort of like, you go back and you take it to your next team meeting, and whether it's your team or a team member, you go like, maybe we should do a transaction taxonomy, and people will be like, what?
What is that?
What is that? And then you can explain, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, no, that'd be useful. And so, yeah, no, absolutely. There's a good homework assignment in there.
Yeah. And then now what you do, there's several things you do with the output of that exercise that feeds the next one. The next one's the customer maturity model, number 3. And here we're assessing the organization's technical maturity and readiness to tackle automation candidates and complex workflows and just doing a tune-up, right? And here what you're really trying to do is to gauge their willingness to make the customer experience better. You're going to find out very quickly how much of an appetite they have to step up to, some of the cool stuff their industry peers are doing. A lot of times when we go through this process, we'll cite and show them, visually, this is what your peers are doing.
Right.
This is what good looks like, And then, but anyway, the customer maturity model is basically a visual where there's 4 columns, and each column represents kind of a graduation step from, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 of how mature they are technically. Have they tried to do automation before? Do they have omni-channel capability? Or is it, are they still scratching down credit card numbers on pieces of paper as they take orders? Are they GDPR compliant?
Sure.
And so on. So then what we do is we attempt to map those use cases we talked about in the transaction taxonomy, the modalities. We map the modalities of web, in-car telemetry, face-to-face, over the phone, chat, whatever the modality is. We then map those into those columns of the maturity model, which then becomes indicative of just how automated or just how sophisticated those use cases are.
Right. Okay.
And then we then strike an arc, a big crayon circle around wherever the cluster of those use cases is. And then it helps us to identify, okay, they're kind of at a phase 2 level of maturity.
Right.
And then basically the big question that's on the table at that point is, well, where do you want to be? What is your level of appetite for moving the needle over to the right a little bit? How deep do you want to go? And here it's funny because sometimes they'll say, we feel okay about where we're, maybe we need a little bit of tune-up, but we don't really want to invest a whole lot in, a tricked out website or smartphone application. We just want to do a better job of answering the phone. Okay. So you kind of, or maybe they can use interactive voice response with order taking or other things. So this helps you then to kind of hone in on appetite.
Right.
So this maturity model.
And do you think do you think they kind of like then, because you talk about the appetite, does that then act as a bit of a check? So when you go right back to the teaming and goal setting, the first step in the process, you're like, but you said up here And it's like you got to make sure those are aligned, because then you end up with internal consistency.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Because what happens, Adrian, is that once they nail down these so-called corporate goals or business unit goals, you want to hold them to that. And then here at the maturity model, you're going to hold their feet to the fire, figuratively. And you're going to say, okay, as you suggested, you guys have an appetite for that or not? Because if you really want to improve by X% on a certain indice, you're not going to do it by staying at phase 2 in this maturity model.
Sure.
You're going to have to step up and start trying some new things in order to move the needle.
Right.
Right. So it's kind of it's a barometer, it's a great step, and it can get a little embarrassing for some of the stakeholders because you're really showing them. It's like you're showing them based on what they told you in the previous steps. You're kind of mirroring back to them. This is what you look like as an organization right now. Yeah. And it's difficult sometimes, right?
Well, no, I'd imagine it'd be testing from a relationship perspective as well. And so sometimes you have to make sure that you don't just kind of double down on just the process and just charge through that, but you actually have to kind of make sure that you are managing relationships as you go, because that's the thing that's going to sustain you through to the end as well, I guess.
Indeed. And I would say that if they're earnest and they set 2 days aside and they're actually showing up in the conference room and engaging, you're looking at a couple days worth of rolling up your sleeves.
Yeah.
I've never been able to conduct one of these in less than 2 days. And it's an investment, just to kind of slog through. But it's very rewarding. And everyone who I've worked with in doing either the whole process or part of it, depending on the complexity, has felt like, oh, this was really worth it.
Yeah.
Now the next part is really interesting.
Okay.
And here's where it gets fun, right? Because now we've laid the groundwork. The first 3 steps really get you to a point where, okay, we understand what we want to do. We understand where we want to be in terms of maturity, and we've characterized the kind of transactions and modalities and complexity that we're already dealing with. So now in step 4, we map those against a grid where the X axis is complexity and the Y axis is transaction volume.
Right.
And you basically, create a little, circle or a little square that has in it the name of the use case and the modality, and you literally plot it on that grid. So in other words, if you're in the upper right-hand quadrant where the use case is highly complex and also high volume, it's in the upper right-hand corner. Sure. Versus, ones that are not so complex or not that frequent and are dead simple, right? In the lower left-hand corner. So as you create this constellation of use cases, of touch points, you're then able to visualize very easily where the purported clusters of activity would be in terms of figuring out, well, how many of these little satellites do you want to tackle?
Right.
Now,
yes.
The only prescriptive thing about this whole process, and you might want to call it dogmatic, is we're into Kaizen, we're into incremental improvement. We try to use the process as a means of constraining how much work gets done. Yeah, it's meant to be kind of a sieve that helps the business to understand, look, don't try to do all of this at the same time, because they're going to find like 25 different points of light where they might be able to automate or use AI or advanced workflows. And you have to kind of rein them in, because if they try to do all of them at the same time, it'll be an utter failure. First of all, no one can do that. And secondly, what they're going to want to prove to the chief financial officer or to the executive director is, look, we got this win here and we've saved this much money as a result of doing this thing. Give us budget to do another one.
Right. And then you get
right?
into the
So
ROI kind of question where you can
yeah,
go,
yeah, yeah,
here's a clear kind of like for you. I said, this is maybe high volume, but it's low complexity. It's probably like an easy win. It has this much kind of like ROI because it takes
right,
X amount of time and effort to do that,
right,
blah, blah, blah.
right. Yeah, and so look, this helps people to, visualize, rationalize, and make some quick decisions as a team, and it kind of moves the ball forward,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's now that's why I'm saying now it gets interesting, right?
Yeah.
Now, number 5 is we tease out these essential use cases and workflow candidates, um, and evaluate how the business operates and engages with customers. Okay. Now, this might take a ride along where you sit next to an agent and listen to what he or she says or watch what they do. Or this may take, them faking up an account for you and logging onto a website with fake credentials so that you can look at, how transactions work. But the idea here is if you're going to automate something, or if you're going to put an advanced workflow in place that helps to smooth out a process, whether that process smoothing is customer facing or
Mm-hmm.
agent facing,
Mm-hmm.
knowledge worker facing. I mean, it's a varied constituency. It's not just for customers. I mean,
No, sure.
you've heard the phrase, happy wife, happy life. You know, in the context of CX, it's happy customer, healthy business,
Yeah, no,
right? So you,
100%.
so you want to keep the agents happy, because if the agents are not happy, something's wrong. They're beleaguered. Maybe they're swivel chairing a lot, looking at all different screens. It's hard for them to grab data. They're doing a lot of tedious, wrap up work. They're getting burned out. Customers are yelling at them because they can't lay their hands on information quickly, and they can't resolve stuff. They have to transfer calls. First contact resolution is all messed up. This is why there's churn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the constituencies varied here. It's not just the customer. If you have a really happy agent who you've given proper tooling to, the experience that the customer has with that agent is going to be superior.
Yes.
So there's no doubt about it. I've seen it a million times.
Sure.
But anyway, what is the point? So in this step number 5, we're trying to get the stakeholders involved to educate you as the consultant or you as the facilitator on what are the metes and bounds of the transactions the way they currently are.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to figure out, okay, what part of this thing that they're doing could be possibly smoothed out or automated. I'll give you a quickie example.
Okay.
Yeah, look at, uh, a complex, let's say, travel hospitality call where you're booking a reservation, right? You're looking at 8 to 10 minutes
Mm-hmm.
on the inside, right?
Yeah.
It like 8 to 10 minutes, So here's the thing. Agents a lot of times have to take notes, especially if it's a complex transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, these notes are not taken during the call because
Right.
you're engaged with the customer and you just don't have, you just can't split your mind like that, right? So what happens is after the customer hangs up, or even a chat, it doesn't have to be a phone call, but after the transaction is concluded, the agent goes into what we call a wrap up,
Mm-hmm.
right? Post-call wrap-up period, where they're, typing in notes about what occurred, and they're doing fulfillment downstream, sending an email or sending an SMS that then has a hyperlink in it that takes them to a VOC survey, whatever. There's a lot of work that happens before they are able to fully disposition the transaction and make themselves ready for the next transaction.
Mm-hmm.
That period of time in wrap-up is what feeds into what we call agent occupancy, or the overall productivity level of an agent. Typically, it's 65% between bathroom breaks, training, stretching your legs, doing wrap up. The amount of time that you're actually on the phone or in a chat with customers is maybe 65% of your day.
Right.
So that agent occupancy number is a number that we use a lot of times to calculate the efficacy of an agent and the cost of transactions, right?
Sure.
It's a very important number. Okay, so what's the example? Well, imagine this: call comes in, it's transcribed in real time, put on the screen so the agent doesn't have to ask the customer to repeat themselves, so they can actually see what the person said. And then at the end of the call, AI can be used to do automatic summarization of the call, even insert sentiment statements saying, for example, 8-minute phone call, 10-minute phone call, customer called in to complain about their reservation. They want to move. They were upset that the plane was late or whatever, and they want to rebook. Blah blah blah. But the agent ameliorated their concerns, rebooked them, tried to allay their concerns, and the customer sentiment was improved by the end of the call. We're rebooked, ticket number, whatever. Blah 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 blah. Okay, that summarization with sentiment didn't have to be typed by the agent.
Yeah.
Nor did so you can reduce handle time by like 30%. It's amazing. Now I call it kind of the gateway drug of AI, in terms of its application in a CX type of scenario. But how does this equate to step number 5? Well, it equates because you're analyzing each of these use cases that you identified in the transaction taxonomy, and you're trying to figure out, is there a way that some of this can be enhanced? Like, for example, now even downstream of that, you could, with dynamic scripting and downstream process automation, which is not necessarily full on AI, you can have the agent click a button saying the disposition was spoke to the customer, spoke to the prospect, and they need follow-up, or it needs a proposal, or whatever. They click a button, then we can extract the person's name, do a mail merge into an email. That the disposition name actually triggers the use of a specific template that is a thank you note, gets sent out by email, that's personalized, that has a hyperlink in it, that then takes them to a VOC survey. None of that, everything that I just said, is one button press by the agent, instead of her cobbling it all together manually, you see.
Absolutely.
So you want to follow that process such that you're identifying every single step in the use case and writing down what is manual, what is semi-automated, what are the friction points. That's the whole purpose of number 5, right?
Okay, perfect.
Now, the 6th step, now here we're going to get political again. We're going around the horn, okay? And number 6 is very interesting, because what we do here is we rationalize business rules and policies.
Okay.
It's interesting because when we talk about those use cases in the previous step, now we're talking about, okay, now that we understand the mechanics of it, now let's talk about the fidelity of its execution in terms of what an agent is allowed to say, not allowed to say, when a supervisor gets involved. What are the rules that govern the behavior? Now, I'll give you an example. There was a large customer in the cell phone business, like one of the largest in the world. And when I worked at Convergys, we did a special thing for them using a decisioning engine to help them with handset upgrades.
Okay.
A customer calls in, they say they want a new handset, they want the new iPhone 14 or whatever, right? And they say, yeah, I've been a long-time customer, and I pay my bill on time every month, and I want a free upgrade or whatever. I want a discount. If they don't, here was the problem that they were having. It was AT&T, by the way.
Right.
The problem they were having is that if the customer didn't like what they heard from the agent might say, well, no, I'll have to get permission from a supervisor. It doesn't look like you've been doing business with us long enough to rate a free upgrade. The person would hang up, call in again and talk to another agent. We call that in the industry, there's a technical term for this. You ready? Shopping for a better answer.
Well, yeah. Yeah, they're gaming the system, right?
Yeah. So what would happen is, it's like, it's gaming. It's also social engineering, right? So customers were called in repeatedly until they finally got the answer they were looking for. And because the rules of engagement were not very well defined. So they were literally losing, would you believe, millions of dollars a year with discretionary handouts that were happening. So they had to rein it in, right? So we put together a decisioning engine and automation flow that would do data dips in like 17 different databases, ERP, billing, everything, in order to build a profile of the customer. You know, what is their aging in terms of their billing? Do they pay on time? How big of a customer are they? How many lines do they have? How long have they been doing business with us? Blah, blah, blah. And then it would do a calculation automatically of where in the tiering they would rate. And then all of that data then, because of the ANI or the caller identification, CCI or whatever you want to call it, that would do a screen pop, bring up the customer, all their data dips would happen automatically, and then when it push a little note to the agent saying this person's at tier 2,
Right.
you know, they deserve a 50% discount. So what it did is it unified and normalized the answer for all the agents, right? So that, you know, everyone was saying the same thing, and it killed the social engineering.
Yes.
Right.
Well, then
Okay.
again,
So
at the same time, you can go like, if they call in again, they go like, well, actually, our model tells us, or our system kind of tells us that you're a customer that's been around for X, you spend Y, you got X number of lines. Yes, you're really kind of valuable customer, and we can offer you this. This is our offer.
Exactly.
And they go, no, I don't like it. And they call again and they get exactly the same thing.
They get exactly the same answer, right? So not only does this reduce the number of phone calls that come in because people start getting it after a while, that they're unified, that it's normalized, but it also reduces the hunting and pecking that an agent will have had to have done in doing data dips into these separate systems in order to cobble together the answer. You'd be surprised at just how disparate and siloed, you know, these systems are. Now I'm going back about 10 years and it's really improved. But anyway, rationalizing the business rules and policies around a targeted automation project is very important because you've heard the adage, garbage in, garbage out.
Sure.
In other words, here's the warning. If you attempt to automate a process that is ill-defined and doesn't have articulated rules, you're going to get garbage. So this facilitates the reckoning of, hey, maybe we need to tune up our policies and our rules of engagement before we start automating some of these things, right? It forces that issue. It's a force of discipline. Step number 6 is what it is, right?
Okay.
You know, but it's interesting. You see when you see what happens there. It's very very interesting. And then step 7, we do what we call high level workflow worksheets where we identify current state, future state, and we map in the modalities to understand. Okay, it looks like a lot of these things that we wish to do involve the use of a smartphone application or involve the use of interactive voice response. There seems to be a cluster of those asks. We need to roll that up into one statement of work, right? So these high-level workflow worksheets help us to figure out, well, it's kind of a final sanity check of whether or not what we're being too ambitious.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
You know, and then lastly, we have what we call a CX engagement best practices template. And all this is, and it's not meant to be prescriptive, it's basically a means to identify the modes of communication, web, smartphone, telephone, in-car telemetry, face-to-face, whatever it is, face-to-face kiosk, let's say. And what we do there is we actually map, it's like a logic diagram, we actually map the modes to the transaction, to the next steps in the transaction, to the resources, the data dips, the people that have to be involved. And we just do this crazy map. It's like, have you ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind?
Yes.
You know, with the yarn all over the little push pins and the yarn going back and forth. It's kind of like that. It's kind of a detailed counting of what has to happen data dip wise, screen pop wise, evocation of intelligent routing, the use of agents, for example, and it kind of does a beautiful mind mapping of what's going to happen in that. And that then becomes kind of an artifact that goes into a statement of work.
Okay.
Right. So I say we're not highly prescriptive in exactly how that's charted out, because different companies have different ways of doing it with, different tools like Figma or other drawing tools and logic flow diagrams. So we're not telling people how to do that. We're just suggesting that the final step should be a very detailed logic flow chart of exactly what they want to happen for that particular automation. That, and then all the other outputs, because there's an output at every step of this process, goes into a statement of work, and then Bob's your uncle.
Then you set off.
Yeah.
And so thank you for that. I mean, that's for that really quite detailed overview. I mean, that's really, really helpful. So it really brings it to life. But I mean, there's the book's not a huge tome. It's not like, it's not 600 pages. It's like, 250 pages or something. I can't remember exactly how many pages is it. It's
no, it's like 150. It's very short.
Oh, it's 150 pages. So it's very short, but there's a lot more detail in the book with kind of templates and all sorts of different things. And I think what strikes me about the whole thing is what you've described is and I go back to the sort of title of the book, sort of mastering customer experience, is that what you've done is you've painted a picture of, if you're a practitioner in this space, of how you've got to manage people, you've got to understand kind of like process, you've got to kind of understand incentive and alignments and a little bit of technology and all these kind of different kind of things in order to kind of get this kind of right. And so you you've opened the box and gone, this is how much you need to know about and to be good at, particularly the facilitation of it and understanding the landscape of it and being comfortable with data and technology and process and all these different things. If you want to be successful at this and to deliver projects that are successful, that deliver better customer outcomes, better employee outcomes, and better business outcomes. And so it's like, I think the book does a really good job of going, you're not just operating on the surface, but you're going deep. And this is the reality of kind of what it takes to actually deliver some of these great projects. So that's why I think it's really useful. I find it really useful. Thank you for taking us through that
Sure.
8-step process.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure also that people have gone through this, and in your experience, that there are places that people maybe fall short or they skip over, and that becomes it hamstrings them, as it were, in terms of their ability to execute. So, where is the kind of which of the steps do people normally try and skip over because they go, no, it's fine, we'll get to that kind of later, or we've done enough on that, let's move on?
Yeah. Well, that's provocative because what it all comes down to is, leadership.
Right.
Somebody in that organization has to, assert some leadership and helping the rest of the team to build a business case for why we're doing this, creating an ROI calculation for each use case, which is not that hard to do. It's a little bit of mathematics, but it's like, what is the savings in time? What is the savings in terms of churn rate of the customer?
Mm-hmm. What
is the savings in terms of being able to upsell or close a deal quicker, so on and so forth? If you don't take the time to build an ROI calculation, a return on investment calculation, then your project may not be looked upon with favor.
Sure.
By the people that hold the purse strings, who would actually be paying for the work to get done. So I'd say the biggest failure is the lack of due diligence when it comes to putting together an ROI calculation. And I know it sounds simple, but you got to set the tone for that right from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be able to say to the stakeholders, you're going to be identifying really cool things that's going to change everything, that's going to make your CX so much better, provide sublime customer experiences, make things easier for your agents. If it's worth pursuing, it's worth papering.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth getting out a calculator and doing some calculations and making a pitch to management that we need to do this thing. This is the benefit that we're going to derive from it. And that's where people fall down. They
Right.
don't do that. And
Yeah.
then they're not taken seriously as a result.
Yeah. I think that's it's an often a common refrain where people forget that almost as a CX leader or a practitioner in a large organization, that your first and possibly most important customer is your CFO.
Yeah.
And if you don't get that, and if they if you don't completely are aligned with and delivering to their expectations, then you're going to be toast at some point along the way.
Yes, sir.
So, and do you have I mean, I know Nexiva works with a huge range of different kind of clients. Do you have an example of a client that you can maybe tell me about? You don't have to describe that. You don't have to name them if you don't want to. But you've taken through this kind of process, and what it's allowed them to do just to bring that whole thing to life. Because I know, as we said right at the beginning, is that this is something that's emerged from 25 years worth of work that you've kind of codified and put in book form, but it's been living out in the wild for years now. So I'm guessing that a number of clients have gone through this. So if you can give us an example of one, that'd be brilliant.
Sure. Well, the one that comes to mind immediately, because I was personally involved in this one, is On Track Health,
Okay.
which is a behavioral health company here in the States. And the relationship has blossomed. It's a notable partnership right now. We do a lot of things together. These guys are always on the vanguard of innovation, always trying new things. They're pretty amazing people. But when we first went through the process about 7 years ago, they were looking for ways to uh, identify trouble spots with their patients.
Right.
Just to put things in context, behavioral health company, they do wellness programs.
Mm-hmm.
They've got nurse practitioners that they call care coaches
Mm-hmm.
that on a regular basis speak to patients who are often care averse, right?
Right.
Helping them with their medication, trying to get them on the right track. That's why they call it On Track, right?
Right.
In terms of taking their medications, vital signs and stuff like that. So they're constantly talking to patients, these nurse practitioners, these care coaches. Sometimes they talk to them over the phone. Sometimes they do it through a chat or SMS. It's all secure, of course. And they asked me the question, is there any way using automation or AI that we could identify SIHI, which stands for suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, right? And so we
Wow.
started,
Okay.
so part of what fell out of the process in terms of a possibility of a use case, to aid in the process of understanding whether or not a dialogue with someone should be escalated to a clinician, to a
Mm-hmm.
behaviorist who could literally talk someone off the ledge,
Yeah.
or at least, call the police or whatever. So we put together an AI program that would do classification of phrases. And in the beginning, this is before generative AI. In the beginning, we had to actually construct 500 phrases and use AI classification to identify those phrases. Now, of course, you can do it with generative AI, and but where you get the gist of what they're saying, and then it'll understand, right?
Sure.
But anyway, so in that dialogue, we were able to pluck out of all these millions of transactions going on, the ones where this, hurtful ideation is actually occurring. And there's nuances, and sometimes a human being can't catch it
Mm-hmm.
as much as they want to, and they're listening. Um, Another thing they're doing that's really cool is using transcription and automatic summarization. In fact, they're kind of pushing the envelope of summarization by writing generative AI prompts that identify. And I know this sounds like the first thing I said, SIHI. There's another acronym, MITI, which is a reflective listening technique standard developed at the University of New Mexico, where it looks for and rates empathy and reflective listening.
Okay.
So they're actually using that to hone in on how well a nurse practitioner is is communicating with a patient. So they're one example. I mean, there's others, but I can tell you, I'm very proud of these folks for them just so willingly embracing the use of automation and the use of AI in what is usually a very conservative
Yes.
industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and of course they do it with security. I mean, we're high trust certified, HIPAA certified, and that of course engenders a spirit of trust.
Yes.
That we're certified for that kind of thing. Yeah, but
I love the idea that, I mean, the SIHI is like, okay, yeah, why? Because there's also this kind of, the as you say, spotting those nuances sometimes is difficult. If we miss things as human beings, and sometimes we do spot things, but we also need to acknowledge that we miss things, and having a bit of an assistance that tries to flag these things and spot them is always going to be helpful. I think the idea about trying to the reflective listening and trying to measure empathy is a key part of that, particularly in that sort of domain. But also in many domains but it's taking that sort of QA process to another kind of like level, because more often than not, people measuring empathy in how empathetic an agent was in a call can be sometimes quite reductive. It's almost a bit like, oh, how many times you've mentioned, I'm sorry you feel that way, or, well, that must be really hard for you. And you're a bit like, and it's just like tick, 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 and you're prompted to say that a number of times, and it becomes a very reductive way of showing empathy. And you're like, well, but actually doing it in a slightly more sophisticated way that's really kind of pleasing to hear. But that's kind of great. But what I want to do, kind of, Edwin, is there anything else? Well, I want to ask you, is there anything else you want to kind of highlight that we've missed out? Because before I can actually zoom out a little bit and give me a little bit of a broader peer into your crystal ball, let's say, about some of the features. Is there anything that we've missed that you want to highlight about the book or so?
Well, yeah. I mean, what we're trying to do here at Nextiva, and the book helps with this in terms of establishing this tighter, more consultative relationship with customers, is we're trying to help them deal with some mega trends that are very difficult. I call them the big three. One of them is this confluence of technology. A lot of these customers, they have these old, siloed, creaky systems from the turn of the century. Separate outbound dialing platform, separate social monitoring platform, separate inbound campaign management system, a separate chat system. It's just a ghastly mess, as they said in Mary Poppins, right? So it's amazing just how creaky some of these things are. But now, with the confluence of all these different technologies and more of a favored platform-based approach, which is what we do, it creates many opportunities. But that mega trend of the confluence of technology is something that's really on the minds of practitioners. Second is today's consumer is a different kind of beast than 20 years ago.
Sure.
Everyone is like self-publishing in social media, getting their thoughts out there, crowdsourcing their decisions, and demanding personalization, demanding quick resolution to things. It's just, oh my goodness, the expectations that they have are very big.
Sure.
And a lot of companies just can't step up to that expectation. And lastly, there's this kind of issue of AI being a little bit headless, lacking leadership. This is a big trend. Everyone's hearing, we've got AI, and they're like, well, where do we start?
Wow.
So the book helps people to get started and in a judicious and steady way. We don't advocate just doing things willy-nilly. We don't want to do anything with reckless abandon.
No.
So we don't like this idea of headless AI. So we try to be, adult about it and try to, consult with people and try to help them make really good decisions. And the book helps with that.
I think thank you for those three strands, because I think they're important points. But the last one I think is very well made, because oftentimes it feels to me right now is that everybody is looking to go is trying to be AI led, and so it's almost like taking a spanner, they're looking for a nut to tighten, as it were, rather than where the process that you're advocating here is actually starting with the business, the people, and then the customers and what they want to do and what they want to try and achieve. And then you end up folding the tools and the automation, and some of them are going to be enabled and powered by artificial intelligence in order to achieve better for those constituents, as it were, rather than the other way around. So it's almost like it's not the tail wagging the dog; it's the dog wagging the tail.
Yeah,
and I think that's that's
exactly.
the point, and that's what I like, because it feels like it's a resetting of this is not just about AI. Because actually, here's the thing: it's going to change. Things are going to change. New tools are going to emerge. Techniques are going to get kind of better. Possibilities are going to expand, etc., etc. But you still have to attend to your business and the people in it and the customers that you deal with, and you want to be able to choose the most appropriate kind of tools to attend to the problems that you be able to identify that exist today, and then what you're going to build to tomorrow. So, and that's what I really like about the book, because it deals with the reality rather than getting carried away by, the possibility, as it were.
Indeed.
So, thank you for that, Edwin. I want to kind of like finish off with a few quick fire questions before we finish up, because I know we talked about a bunch of different things, and I always like to try and boil it down right at the very end. And this is how I've been trying to do it, is asking people to complete this sentence. And the sentence is: if you would like to improve your customer or employee experience, Edwin Margolis says, do this, ... Edwin, please complete that sentence for me, sir.
Okay. Well, I think it's, if you want to improve your customer or employee experience, you need to tune in to what they hate, what they love, and then do something about it.
Right.
And once you've done that, you'll be in a much better position to offer them a sublime experience. So it's about listening, observing, understanding. It's about developing an appetite for understanding. And that means asking questions. That means calling them up. That means sending them surveys. That means putting them on a panel, advisory panel. That means, playing the customer and going through transactions that they would go through. So I think that's the key. Is a thirst for understanding.
That's it. Love it. Now, the second question is, and it would be remiss of me not to ask you a punk-related question, because this is the Punk CX podcast. And so I'd like your perspective on, what company or brand do you think takes a more punk approach to customer experience, and why?
Well, I think the gold standard is Costco and Amazon.
Okay.
You go to Amazon and they've been doing this for decades. They're on the forefront of this. It's easy to make a purchase. They give you suggestions of what else you might want to buy. They give you information about, what might work for you. Customers like you.
Mm-hmm.
They're using AI there, of course. They rack and stack, previous orders and make it easy for you to eyeball that and order the same thing. There's no hassle returns.
Mm-hmm.
They're like Nordstrom's and department store in that regard. So they're the gold standard, I think. And Costco, they get really high NPS scores too. They're both in the 80s,
right,
which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
In fact, Nextiva's, I think our score in NPS for service is 86. So we're actually pretty good at it too.
Big up,
Yeah.
Nextiva. Costco's not an example that's often kind of shared, so thank you for that. Amazon comes up again and again and again, and I always say when I hear, it makes me think when I hear Amazon is, yes, they are the gold standard, and like you said, they've been at it for decades. And here's a thing that you might know or might not know, if you put relentless.com into a browser, it redirects to Amazon.
Interesting.
And I always think that that's interesting because it probably speaks to what was in Jeff Bezos's mind when he was thinking about URLs and buying all sorts of different domains. But relentless must have been kind of in the mind around, we should, because we want to be something that's relentless. This is in the pursuit of things. And I think for me, it speaks to their approach. They are relentless in this whole improvements and trying to kind of, in terms of building their business, engaging with customers, delivering better services, all these different things. And so I always try and share that with people because I when I found it out, I was like, that's fascinating. But yeah,
it is fascinating.
It's another thing. I've told that to people in workshops before, like put in relentless.com into your browser and see what happens. And then they go, their faces when they find out they go to Amazon.com is brilliant. But one final thing, Edwin, before I let you go, is if you're like me, you find yourself wake up in the morning and whether it's a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and you check out the news, and the world is a weird place right now. There's all sorts of funny things and weird and strange things going on. And so what I've been trying to do is end these podcast conversations on a good news story. So is there anything, can you tell me what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week? You just gone, I love that. That's brilliant. That's just kind of made me feel warm and fuzzy. What would that be?
I'm going to give you a personal one.
Yeah, brilliant.
Then I'll give you a business one. And personally, my wife and I, we run a animal sanctuary on a ranch in Central Texas. And, I was able to go up to one of these wild Mustangs that we got from the Bureau of Land Management and, put my arm around it and kind of hug it, and it kind of hugged me back.
Wow.
So that was very interesting. So we got 4 of these wild Mustangs from the Bureau of Land Management recently. So now we've got like 6 horses, a mule, 7 donkeys, sheep, goats, all kinds of critters that we take care of. But it was very uplifting to see how these animals who heretofore were out in the wild trotting around in the Sierra of Nevada,
right?
And now they're on our property, and they're leaning in emotionally to human beings, and it's just amazing to witness that. Now, from a business standpoint, something very interesting happened this past week. I had the pleasure of meeting with some top practitioners and thought leaders on this very subject of CX, and some of the folks were from Mercedes-Benz, Scotiabank, Grubhub, to name a few. And I was able to facilitate a workshop with them. And we had some brainstorming ideas and some best practices all around improving CX. So what I can report to you, Adrian, is that thought leaders in these big brand companies, they do seem to care.
Right.
And they want to make things better. It's just that a lot of them just don't know where to start. Right. But it was a positive experience to talk to them, and we transcribed the whole thing. And then, my assistant then was able to get all this data from all these best practice ideas from 4 different tables where we were rotating around and talking. And then we summarized it and then sent it back out to like 25 people who were in this one session that I facilitated. And that was really fun.
Nice.
So anyway, yeah. So there you have it. Those are my 2.
Well, great. I love the story about the Mustang. That's brilliant. I love the story that people are keen to make a difference and to do good work. Sometimes you just don't know where to get started. So thank you for those stories. I just also want to say thank you. Well, first of all, congratulations on the book, Edwin. I think it's great. Thank you for kind of taking us through elements of the book, and just thank you for sharing your time, your insight, and your expertise with me today. That's been awesome.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I had a lot of fun doing it. So thank you, Adrian.
You are welcome.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. Do tune in again. Thanks very much.